Hi, everyone. I'm Linda Sheldon Fell, and this is Moments of Hope with the International Grief Institute. And tonight we are talking about suicide. We have a very special guest, Dr. Sally Spencer Thomas, and she has a really impressive bio. And so I'm just going to give you a quick rundown. She is a clinical psychologist. She is an award-winning speaker on mental illness and suicide prevention, and she has lead roles with the International Association of Suicide Prevention, American Association of Suicidology, National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and the United Suicide Survivors International. And in 2016, she was invited to speak at the White House on men's mental health. So welcome to the show, Sally.
Oh, I'm so glad that I'm here, and thank you so much for this opportunity, Linda. It's an honor.
Thanks for joining us. Now, I know that you live on a mountaintop in Colorado and you have snow. And so we're going to keep our fingers crossed that our connection stays with us for the duration of the show. So first off, thank you for being here. Suicide is something that everybody needs to learn the red flags and how we can all work together as a society to, reduce and prevent suicide. What's really interesting is the fact that working age men from 25 to 54 is the highest number of suicide deaths in the United States. Who knew? When we think of suicide, we think of teenagers, right? And so before we get into that, though, I want you to take us back. You've got living experience, not just, the applied education and such, as a doctorate. You're also a clinical psychologist, but you also have living experience with your own brother who died by suicide in 2004. Take us back to that time, what that was like for you, where you were at in life and what was going on.
Sure. So I had been in the field of mental health, if you count my undergraduate years, about 16 years at that point. I had moved out to Colorado to go to graduate school at the University of Denver. I had been practicing in the university and in a small private practice. And I had an academic and a clinical interest in suicide prevention, just because it's such a big, important issue for all mental health providers. So I don't feel like, my preparation for the moment of my brother's crisis was lacking, given the state of training at the time. I had an excellent education.
Sure.
But when the issues become personal, they definitely take a different turn. And my brother, by all accounts, was living a very exceptional life. He was just brilliant entrepreneur who launched a business that went national in his 20s. He had a beautiful wife and children and loved by many friends, and this was just exceptional, like funny and just grandiose is what we say in the clinical term. So he became very mean and pushed away all the inner circle people, his family and his friends. So that was very hard. It was hard to reach him and hard to have conversations with him. And we can pinpoint it actually to the day he met with his accountant, and his accountant said, "You're broke. You've spent all your money. You can access no more money." That he went from being very manic and agitated to the worst depression we had ever seen. And it ended up being a fatal depression. We surrounded him with all kinds of love and tried to connect him to resources, but I think he actually came back to the family to say goodbye. And he was just in overwhelming emotional pain. And I remember the last time we got together, it was a Thursday night. To this day, my kids and I spend Thursday nights at my parents' house, and he was there, and we had sat down at the study, and my family and I had all just read a book, The Unquiet Mind by Kay Redfield Jamison, and she talks about her own lived experience with bipolar condition. And I said, look, here's this other incredibly successful person who has something similar. The good news is she's gotten well, and we're going to figure this out. And he turned to me and he said, but Sally, it's madness. And 4 days later, he was gone.
My goodness.
So, yeah. So in my, and he's not here. I can't ask him what he meant by that, but I believe what he was trying to tell me, just knowing how persevering he was, and how throughout so much of his life, he found things that helped him through the depression. I really believe he didn't give up hope that he couldn't get well again. I feel like because his mania was so public, he gave up hope because he didn't think the world would accept him anymore because of mental illness. And he just said, just madness, and he couldn't be someone who lived with that. So that stuff makes me super mad that, here's someone fighting for their life with a treatable mental health condition, and they have to deal with all kinds of discrimination and prejudice and fears about being judged. Yeah.
There's a lot of shame with mental illness, and, especially in men. Because men are, they consider themselves the breadwinner and the provider for the family and this and that. And so, your brother was, when you talk about him being exceptional, he wasn't just a successful entrepreneur. He was also a very skilled athlete. And, when we think of mental illness, that is not the stereotype that we envision, right? And so, with your brother, at what age, going back even a little further, at what age was he diagnosed with bipolar?
Yeah, he was first diagnosed when he was a college student. Okay. He had made pretty bad decisions and got himself kicked out. And so my father promptly marched him into the psychiatrist's office. This was the late 80s. Nobody's really talking about this kind of stuff. And my brother was like, yeah, I don't know what that is, but I'll be fine. And he went on to prove that. I just wanted to also go back to the comment about the athletes. I think more and more athletes are coming out with their own stories. We had a NBA player who just recently disclosed his struggles with anxiety in a pretty significant way publicly just last week. We have a number of, tomorrow I'm on a webinar with a professional NHL hockey player who attempted suicide and survived. So I think there's a lot of athletes who are realizing it doesn't do them any good to kind of white knuckle the situation. It tends to get worse.
Right. And, bless them for coming out with their story. Storytelling is such a healing modality, but it also takes a lot of courage. And so for people to be brave enough to share their story, it validates the journey of many other people. And but I think about how the stigma and the shame that's applied to mental health, it does not embrace, invite people to come out with their story. So it takes a lot of courage for them to do that. Men die by suicide 3.5 times more than women. That's another statistic that is fairly shocking. Yeah. Why do you think that is?
Well, the easy answer, the quick answer that we give is it's largely because men choose more lethal means when they attempt suicide. So while the intensity of despair is probably equal between the genders, women tend to choose types of means like pills and cutting, where there's more opportunity for rescue, either self-rescue, and this is very common that people attempt, and then right in the moment, they're like, oh no, what have I done? And with pills and cutting, you have a moment where you can call 911, you can reach out to your parent or your partner and say, I made a mistake, right? And then, or you can drive yourself to the doctor. There are a number of ways that people we have time on our hand, which helps. Men tend to choose firearms and hanging where there's no window for that. Now, the deeper answer So that's the first level answer. The deeper answer, so why do men choose more lethal means? Why do women choose less lethal means often? And that, I think, has a lot to do with cultural scripts around the genders. So men are taught, do not fail, get the job done. And so the idea of failing in this regard in their head is unsurmountable, and so they'll actually do things that will prevent rescue, and really, and it's a really lethal situation. So part of the conversation that we're having with men who are in the place where a big part of them still wants to live, and this is most people who experience suicidal thoughts, they are wavering between, I don't really want to die, I just want the pain to end, and there's some really good reasons for me to stay. And if we can keep them safe and keep them away from those lethal means during that period where they're sorting it out and getting their feet back on the ground again, we can often save their lives. So the means make a difference. And there's tons of discussion out there now on how do we have conversations about this in our country when we're so divisive about firearm safety or firearms rights and all of this. And I can tell you there's some really creative, collaborative people having very respectful, dignified conversations about these very difficult subjects. And it's going pretty well, which is surprising. And because nobody wants anybody to die of suicide. We could all agree on that. So it's really about how do we keep people's homes safe for now, especially when there's someone living there who is really in a crisis. How do we keep them safe until they're through that crisis?
Right, right. And so what are the signs and red flags of a male who is struggling with mental health? And then what are the red flags of suicidal ideation? Are those red flags separate, like, levels that people can be aware of?
So I'm glad you asked that. And it's never as simple as we want to make it out to be, because we want people in boxes and we want to make it's just clearer when everything's clear, and it's never clear with the human behavior. So it's mostly, I call it overlapping bell-shaped curves. So you have women's behavior going like this and men, and there's a lot of overlap. Like men and women often do a lot of things the same. However, there are some differences that can exist. And one is that for men, their depression is largely undiagnosed because it shows up differently than many women. Men's depression tends to get acted out more externally than women's does. And they do it because they engage in things like agitation and irritation and aggression. They're feeling horrible on the inside, but it's coming out in these agitative, interactive ways. Okay. So that's one way. And what does an angry, agitated, irritated man get? He gets in trouble. He doesn't get empathy. He doesn't get support. He doesn't get people saying, hey, maybe you should go talk to someone. He gets discipline at work. He gets written up by, supervisors. He gets in trouble with the law. He gets incarcerated. That's what happens to men who are living with depression. So one of the first cues is when that overreaction starts to happen out of the blue, or it kind of creeps up like a pot that's boiling over. When you can say, hey, you seem to be blowing a little things out of proportion. You don't seem like yourself. Sometimes when people are doing that, there's things going on. I wonder if we can go, take a walk and talk about it, something like that. Trying to acknowledge that feeling of being unwell is coming out in lashing ways. Right. The other difference that we often see is that men, again, overlapping bell-shaped curves, lots of overlap between this genders, but men tend to try to appease that sense of feeling unwell with substances more so than so. health conditions. Now, emerging signs of suicide overlap with emerging mental health issues, but there are some additional things to look for. And one of them is kind of a preoccupation with death. So you might notice Google searches about death, or just kind of discussions about death and dying that just kind of raise the hair on the back of your neck a little bit. They just don't seem like normal conversations, which you don't really know what's going on. Additional types of things are people doing things like giving away things that are important to them. One of the last things my brother did before he died was he went to the office where he used to work, and he returned a shirt that he had borrowed. I mean, literally within an hour of his death. This was one of the last things he did. And the thinking of why people do that is that they're tying up loose ends. So sometimes people get their wills in order, or insurance, or other things. And like, that's not a bad thing. But when it's coupled with overwhelming life events like divorce or bankruptcy or increased substance use, it's something to ask some questions about.
Right. That's, really, really good information. How can we as a society promote well-being in men? What are we doing that allows them to fall between the cracks?
So we spent a lot of time pondering this question. And by we, I mean my other two partners on the Man Therapy Project, which we'll get to in a second. We noticed, along with the data that was in front of us, that there was a certain subgroup of men that were not being reached by our traditional messaging of, if you're depressed, seek help. And we were missing this group. We call them double jeopardy men. They were men with massive risk factors who were also least likely to seek help on their own, because they had been conditioned since birth to solve their own problems, to be the strong ones, to be the providers, to be the ones that people lean on, not the ones who need to be leaning on someone else, right? They had all this conditioning on what it meant to be a man, and it went totally against the message. If you're depressed, seek help. So we listened to these men. We call them double jeopardy men. We listened to them. We said, how do we find you? How do we reach you? What message would you resonate with? And they said, back off the mental health language, at least on the first approach. We do not see our situation through a lens of mental illness. So if you come at us with that, we're like, it's not us. We're not broken. We're not sick. But they were willing to acknowledge that they felt overwhelmed, that they felt highly stressed, and that the issues were things outside of them. Okay, so things were happening to them, divorce, financial issues, job stress, and it was causing them to feel overwhelmed. So in any process of change, you got to meet people where they're at, and then you can have other kinds of conversations. So one of the language was, are you feeling overwhelmed? Do you feel highly stressed? Yes, I do. Well, let's talk about that. And then you can get into more of a conversation on what's going on with them. The second point that they told us, they said, the idea of going to a mental health professional is so daunting to us, and it honestly doesn't make sense. This is a subgroup of men, not all men, but this subgroup of men, conditioned from birth, don't ask for help. They're like, let me get this straight. You're telling me I got to take an hour or two off from work, drive across town, park my car in front of the mental health clinic where everybody can see it, go in, and this actually turns out to be a big one. Tell the receptionist my reason for being there in front of a room full of people. This is what they think is happening. And then I'm going to be, sent to a room with who's most likely going to be a woman to talk about my feelings for an hour. No, I'm not going. Okay, so this is how they play out how traditional therapy works. And it's honestly not that far from the truth. So that's too big of a jump. So they said, give us some other ways to get better. Give us an opportunity to self-assess. Give us some screening tools so I can guess, so I can figure out how bad is it. Am I worse than other guys? Are other guys in my situation doing things differently to get back on track? I want to know. So give me some screening tools. Give me some self-help tools. Give me some benchmarks to know when I'm in over my head. If there are other guys like me who've gone through something similar and are doing better now, I want to talk to those guys. So peer support for this group of men, super important. They want to know that they're not the only ones, and they want to know that other guys like them made it through the dark forest. And then they said, if those guys tell us that this is a trustworthy resource, we're much more likely to engage with it than some, do-gooder. So all of these little tips. And then finally they said, and if you can make this stuff funny and like really relatable, we'll pay attention. And we're like, oh my gosh. So that put us on a mission.
But that can be done. I know, comedians in the bereavement world, and they are very funny, but very truthful. That's and, right. And they do a beautiful job of conveying the message of hope that they want to convey by using themselves in a way that is personable and relatable. So that can be done. So where are you at in the process then of shoring this up for that, the double jeopardy men?
Yeah. So we went, oh my gosh, we have to make something funny. That's not funny at all. How do we do this? And
it's a tough one, but it can be done.
Yes. And they said to us, well, that's your problem. You got to go figure that out. And we're like, okay. So we partnered with this group called Cactus. They're a full service advertising agency in Colorado. And they're so clever. They're so brilliant. And so they created a fake therapist, Dr. Rich Mahogany. And he uses his kind of cynical, satirical wit to man up mental health. And so he does it by letting men know that some of their stereotypes about masculinity don't really work very well for them, for their overall health, but especially for mental health. And so that we tested it out with our guys. And for the Double Jeopardy men, they really liked that form of humor. They're like, oh my gosh, you got us. And so we tested it out with our firefighters and our cops and our military veteran guys and our construction guys. And they were like, yeah, that works for us. You made it relatable to us. And because it's on a digital platform, you lured us in with the humor. Like, that was very clever. And then once we got to the digital platform, we stayed. And we can see their patterns of behavior in the website. They stay for a very long time because nobody's there to judge them. And they're testing out resources, and they're looking at inspirational videos of other guys like them who've gone through something similar. And they're trying out online things and self-help tips. And, we vetted some professional resources as well. And we vetted the crisis resource. If they come up in their screening tool saying, I'm thinking of suicide, or they come up in their screening tool high across the board, we're going to be like, you know what, it would probably be a good idea to talk to someone now. And then we link them right directly to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Mm-hmm. So this has just been been a really innovative approach to reaching out to a group that has been super hard to reach. And we show up where they are. So we have radio spots, and we put them on talk radio and sports radio. We have.
Yep, I lost you there. Are you viewers? I don't know if you can still see Dr. Sally, but she's frozen on my screen. So Sally, if you can hear us, let's see if we can refresh. Okay, we'll give her a minute, see if she comes back in. That was good information, that's for sure. So hang tight with us, and we'll see if we can get Dr. Sally back in. Dr. Sally, if you can hear me, can you send me a text letting me know that you can hear me? All right, well, I'm not getting anything from her, so I apologize for the technology glitch here, but I think that was really, really good information. To learn more about Dr. Sally's website, mantherapy.org, go there. If you are a female viewer and you have a male that you're worried about, you can go there on his behalf. You can also send him there. Really great information on that. And for Dr. Sally's website, Nope, I think she might be coming back in here. Let's see if she comes back in. But for Dr. Sally's website, it is sallyspencerthomas.com. And she's a fantastic speaker. Her credentials are very impressive, and she's on a mission to, improve social concepts around suicide prevention, especially in men ages 25 to 54. So let's see if she's coming back online here in just a minute. And if not, we will continue the conversation in another show. Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much for being with us tonight. I think we lost Dr. Sally. I hope this information has been useful. If you have any questions, you can reach us at internationalgriefinstitute.com or go to Dr. Sally's website, mantherapy.org. All right. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time. Have a good night.